We are a national community of over 500,000 suburban women working together to defeat extremism in our local communities. And in addition to our band book club, we also host weekly educational events and interviews, our sweep salons on Tuesday nights, and our troublemaker trainings where we teach women like you and me how to organize our friends and neighbors and take action in our communities. We're now in our fourth year of our band book club, and together we've read so many banned and challenged books, and we've barely even made a dent in the list. According to the American Library Association, already this year there are at least 112 proposed state bills concerning school and public libraries that seek to expand the definition and to limit librarian staff's ability expand the definition of what is deemed obscene or harmful to minors, and limit librarian staff's ability to determine which books are in their collections. So you're taking a very important step here tonight in standing up to censorship by being a part of our banned book club and reading these books. So thank you very much for being here. Don't forget to sign up for our next banned book club, which will be on Wednesday, October 15th at 7:30. The book we'll be discussing is The Girl Who Fell from the Sky by Heidi Duro. So make sure that you get signed up for that too. So our book tonight is I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erika Sanchez. It was published in 2017 and is a New York Times bestseller. Since its publication, it has been banned or challenged numerous times. One example, this novel, a National Book Award finalist, has been challenged, banned, and restricted in many school districts across the nation. And an example of that is in the Madison County School District in Mississippi, the book was restricted to students with parental permission because of race and sexuality. The book was also censored by administrators in the Indian River School District in Florida and the Central York School District in Pennsylvania because it is about people of color and undocumented immigrants. We have a very special guest here tonight, and we are excited to have her here. Her name is Stephanie Starks, and she is an LISW-S, and she is a highly sought after mental health administrator, advocate, and influencer. She's the clinical director and CEO of Starks Counseling and Consultation Services, LLC. Ms. Starks has built her career counseling and advocating for children, families, couples, and groups in the greater Columbus community for over 20 years, positioning herself as a leader in trauma-informed and trauma-responsive care in Ohio. The scope of Ms. Stark's practice includes counseling, clinical supervision and training and consulting, and facilitating training and workshops in the community. She spent the last 6 years providing free traumatic grief support groups for parents and caregivers of children who have died to gun violence in Greater Columbus. Her dedication to service led Starks Counseling to securing a $75,000 grant from the City of Columbus, which allowed them to expand their free services to include free counseling and workshops as well. This initiative is in its third year. Her leadership and expertise in trauma led to her giving a King Lincoln Bronzeville TEDx talk on trauma in October of 2022. Ms. Starks was named the 2022 Social Worker of the Year for the state of Ohio by the National Association of Social Workers, Ohio chapter. She's currently serving as the president of the National Association of Social Workers, Ohio chapter. Her dedication has led to several awards, including the 2024 Healthcare Justice Award from Think Make Live, 2024 Community Leaders Award from Mahogany Magazine, as well as 2023 City of Columbus is My Neighborhood Community Heroes campaign. She's a proud graduate of the Ohio State University, where she earned her Master of Social Work. And she's also a proud member of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. So Julie is going to spotlight us, and we will get started. Hi, Stephanie. Thank you so very much for being here
Hi,
with me tonight.
thank you
So,
for the invite.
well, let's dive in.
Wait a
So,
minute, hold on. OHIO.
that's right. I see IO. So
Yes.
we've got some Ohioans in the chat. So this book, I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, is a book about a teenager, Julia Reyes, who suffers from depression and anxiety. This book opens at her sister Olga's funeral, and Olga was tragically hit by a semi. The book takes us through Julia's feelings as she navigates grief. As you might guess, this sets up a perfect storm for her. Being a teen can already be trying. What would you say to someone who is battling grief, depression, and anxiety all at the same time?
So I was very excited when I read the questions you were going to ask me. as you all heard from my bio, my area of expertise is trauma. So the first thing I would say is I would argue she's probably experiencing some level of trauma.
Mhm.
When you talk about depression and grief and loss and anxiety and some of the things that she experienced throughout this book, I would argue at a minimum she's experiencing trauma. Um, a lot of people can experience trauma and it doesn't necessarily lead to the clinical diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, but I would definitely argue you could add trauma to that list of things she's experiencing. And if you think about trauma as an umbrella, depression could fall under trauma, anxiety, grief,
Mhm.
depression.
So
Well, I think I said depression.
so what would be one of the things that you would do to help her to start off with something like that?
If she sought counseling,
Mhm.
educating her on what she's experiencing. And that would be after I actually assessed her, like
Mhm.
actually screened her for these different diagnoses that we're throwing out there: depression, anxiety,
Mhm.
grief. There's actually there's something we use called the DSM that we use to diagnose people. There's an actual diagnosis of prolonged grief. So, even if I suspected she had these things, the first step would be to gather more information from her and her parents, but to also screen her for those things.
Mhm.
hmm
Okay.
And then after I screened her, educate her on, you know, what these things are. I often tell clients, don't get bogged down with the diagnosis. That's really just a way for us to bill insurance and get paid. The important thing, seriously, the important thing is to understand the symptoms associated with these diagnoses, because that's what helps me know how to help a person. And
Gotcha.
that also empowers the person to understand, okay, I have this thing going on. These are symptoms associated with it, and these are the tools I can use to manage it.
Gotcha. So I saw a quote on Threads from someone, I think her name was Tiffany, that said that grief is love with nowhere to go. What do you think about that statement?
It's very true. I actually use that quote. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's grief is unexpressed love or love with nowhere to go. Absolutely. And the funny thing about grief, so trauma is the incident, right? So, for
Mhm.
example, the death of her sister. Grief is the journey you go on after that traumatic incident. And it could last months, it could last years, it could last a lifetime.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, Julia's troubles were compounded by the fact that her parents are undocumented. She worries that if
Mm-hmm.
she, at one point in the book, she worried if she applied for college that her parents would be found out and deported. And this was written prior to all of our current things going on. So keeping that in mind, how do you think that that would add to, and she's 15, how do you think that that would add to a person's depression?
So again, we're focusing on depression, and I understand that was probably in the book.
Yeah, it's heavy in the book.
Yes, but as a trauma focused therapist, I'm going to argue again. At this point, I'm going to say she probably has complex trauma. So,
Hmm.
just to give you a quick and dirty definition of trauma, how I describe it is trauma is a distressing event that was so distressing. It could have happened today, it could have happened 2 weeks ago, 2 years ago, 20 years ago, but it still impacts your day to day functioning at this moment.
Hmm.
So we've already named several things that this young lady has experienced that was probably initially distressing, and she's continuing to deal with it. So I would argue she probably has complex grief, because being an immigrant, even if in the best of circumstances, can be a traumatic experience, because you shift in cultures, you're moving to another country and possibly another continent. So there's trauma just in that. But if she has any fears about her parents being undocumented and being separated from them, that just compounds the trauma.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
So again, if you think about trauma like an umbrella, yeah, she's dealing with depression and anxiety, but she's probably dealing with grief, loss, uh, attachment issues, possibly with this ongoing fear that her parents could just disappear at any time. That's a
Yeah,
lot for a 15-year-old to be dealing with.
absolutely. Absolutely. Um, in the book, though, she and her mom have challenges.
Mhm,
And one of the things that her mother insists on, or her parents insist on, is for her to have her quinceanera, and
mhm,
she didn't want to do it because she was almost 16 in the book, and she felt like that was the time had passed for that. And so
mhm,
but her mom had never given the older sister who passed away one, and so she wanted to do this, kind of, because she didn't want to miss out on giving another daughter that celebration. And she
mhm.
goes along with it, but she begrudgingly goes along with it. How do traditions, I know I didn't have that in the questions, but
Mhm.
how do traditions fit into, when you're going through something, even a trauma experience, when you're going through a trauma experience, how do traditions kind of like impact that? Is that a helpful thing as a rule, or is it not so helpful?
So in the scenario you just gave me, it's kind of complicated. So let's just take, race, ethnicity, immigration, all that stuff out of it. We're talking about a parent child dynamic, right? And she's
Mm-hmm.
at an age where she's trying to figure out who she is separate from her parents. So
Mm-hmm.
there could be tension in that relationship in the best of circumstances. But when you add all these other elements, then it can get complicated. Then on top of that, you're adding grief and loss. So this young lady is trying to deal with the loss of her sister at a period in time in her life where she's also trying to figure out who she is, not just separate from her parents, but now separate from the memory of this sister.
Mm-hmm.
Who is she without her sister, right? Who is she separate from her parents? Who
Mm-hmm.
is she now as a potentially Americanized child, where her parents are trying to hold on to the values and mores and culture related to where they're from? That's a lot, again, to deal with as a 15-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
So I would say it would be complicated. And if she was coming to me for therapy, I think I would start with allowing her to tell me her story, allowing her to tell me what's important to her. Because, and again, taking all these other elements out of it, let's just look at parent child conflict, right? What the parent deems as important in therapy might be different from what the child deems as important
Mm-hmm. I would imagine that happens quite a bit.
all the time. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yep. So you
Mhm.
add trauma to that. You add that they're immigrants. You add that she's a young lady trying to figure out who she is separate from her parents and also how she fits into this culture. That's a lot.
Mhm.
But I will tell you
Mhm.
this, with a good trauma focused therapist like me, she could make it through and would probably end up being incredibly intuitive, smart, resilient, but she would definitely, I think, need some support.
Well, she does eventually get to therapy in the book, but before that point, her mom at one point blames her for her sister's death. And kind of
Mm,
underlying, before, as you're leading up to that, you can see where she also blames herself. She had acted out in school that day, and so instead of her mom and sister being together, however it was, her sister usually came home, her sister wound up stepping in front of that bus. She wasn't
mm,
paying attention, she was paying attention to her phone, and so that's how that happened, and so she kind of blamed herself too. Um, so as the book progresses, after a series of other events, she does try to take her own life. What
mhm,
struck me about this is that from the outside, this character seems so feisty and strong throughout the book up until really kind of that moment. And I think many people are seen that way. Um, do you think as adults we should be checking on the strong teens that we know who are going through traumatic times?
mhm. Absolutely. So, the strong person can also have a cultural context, right?
Hmm.
That's often a label that is put on African American women, for example.
Hmm.
So you have to be careful with those labels, right? And I would also add, the check, not just checking on the strong person, but check on the kids that appear to have it all together. Because guess what? As a therapist that owns my own practice and I've been in business for 20 years, let me tell you, the kids who are struggling the most are typically the ones who on the surface appear to have it all together.
Hmm. I
Those are
would.
the ones who are more often struggling with depression and anxiety.
Hmm.
Those are the kids who are more often than not struggling with suicidal thoughts and self-harming thoughts and urges. It's the kids that everybody thinks are okay because they're not really talking about their feelings and they're
Hmm.
focused on achievement. So it's also a lot of kids who are coming from the suburbs.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I know that this book has been banned for many different reasons. Somebody in the chat asked why the book had been banned. It's been banned for a lot of different reasons. One, it's been banned because it was folks of color and immigrants. Another reason, because it had suicide in it, and people don't think that that's an appropriate subject for kids. It has sex in it. And so they don't think that that's something that is appropriate. And then, Julia spends a good chunk of the book trying to figure out who Olga really was, because who Olga was on the outside isn't who she really was, at the end of the day when she was doing her investigating of her sister to try to figure out who she was. And she missed her sister a lot because she was actually close to her. But
Mm-hmm.
she found out that she didn't know her as well as she quite thought she did. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about banning books in that have this kind of significance culturally and just the stories in general, you know, when you look at, of course, age appropriate this, we're talking about high school. We're not talking about having younger kids
Mm-hmm.
read this book. But you take something like this away. How do you think that impacts kids when you take away books with characters that they can actually identify with?
Um, I think there's a real adverse impact. I think often young people want to hear voices and read stories and watch movies um, with people they can relate to. And the
Mhm.
reality is, in this country, we have a very diverse population of people, right? Of
Mhm.
all age groups. So I think it does a disservice to young people to not be able to read diverse stories. Also, we're a country of immigrants. Like, are any of us from here originally?
Very few.
Right? So right, exactly. Very few. So I also think it's a disservice to act as if, well, whitewash is what I would say. Whitewash our country stories.
Mhm. Mhm.
And these younger generations, listen, I don't care what kind of list is out there with banned books. These young people, they're going to do what they want to do. They're going to read what they want to read. I
Well, the
think it's
author
us older people. I think it's us older people that are still following, lists of books that are banned. But these young people, they get access to whatever they want to get access to, and they're going to read whatever they want to read. They're going to listen to whatever they want to listen to, and God bless them.
Well, the author does not see her book being banned as a badge of honor for sure. She said the censoring of non-whiteness is a scourge upon our country, and any defiance or questioning of that is going to create some backlash. So even she was, kind of feisty about how how this has been treated. Um, so, as a mental health professional, what is one
Mm-hmm.
thing that you wish, though, that people knew, about trauma, about, dealing with grief, that kind of thing?
So I'm sorry, I was also looking at the chat while we were
Hmm.
talking. Someone earlier said trauma can also be passed down generationally. Absolutely. Um, I would say the one thing I would keep in mind is that if you think about that quick and dirty definition I gave you, depending on who you are, what the circumstances of your life are, your age, any number of things can be considered traumatic, but also understand there can be levels to trauma. And I think this book is a prime example. So the focus was on depression, right? Was
Mhm.
trauma mentioned in this book?
Not really, no. It was depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm. So often people who experience trauma may pop up with an initial symptom of depression or anxiety, which is why I specify to people that I'm a trauma focused therapist, because if you just go to a therapist, that therapist could be amazing. But if they don't see things through a trauma lens, they may not catch all these experiences that she's had at a very young age that doesn't just make her susceptible to trauma, but complex trauma, right? She's got a lot of different traumatic events that have piled up, and they've piled up really fast. So I don't know if any of you have heard of ACEs, but it's a screening tool that's used to figure out how much trauma someone has experienced. And there's links to, based on your score, at a young age, if you've experienced a certain level of trauma, it can lead to all sort of physical, mental, emotional health disparities, financial disparities, housing disparities as you get older, right? So it's also important to keep in mind that the things we experience as young people, the sooner you can get a young person into therapy, especially if it's a trauma focused therapist, the better. You can lower those ACEs scores. You can help them build resilience.
Mhm.
And I would say, for older people as well, like be mindful. There may be something that you've experienced as a young person that is still impacting you to this day. That is potentially trauma, unhealed
Mhm.
trauma at that. And it doesn't
Mhm.
go anywhere. Like, if it's not addressed, it's not going anywhere.
As we
Oh,
get
one
to the
other
next.
thing, because wait a minute, real
Mhm.
quick. One other thing, because you also asked me about grief, right? So
Mhm.
keep in mind with grief, there's all types of grief, right? Typically, we think about grief as in a death, right?
Mhm.
Somebody physically dying. But there can be the loss of a friendship, a loss of a relationship, a loss of a job, a loss of a marriage. People
Mhm.
could be grieving the state of our country and our world right now.
Mhm.
So there's different levels of grief. When you think about grief and loss, don't just assume that there has to be the death of a person in order for you to be grieving a loss.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, well, I do want to thank you for coming and sharing with us today.